Hey everyone, my name is Brendan. I'm not Andrew. Um, what I do is I'm the daily news map maker, data entry guy for Ukraine Daily um, Update map. And I've been doing that, helping out Andrew in the basement and writing articles for Tochny since this past summer. Uh, got started about a year ago, volunteered about a year ago, and then got started in about June. And I've been working on this map every day ever since. Um, Trying to bring the daily minutia of the war to a more presentable format so that all of you guys can understand it, and also so I can understand it too. Um, but I want to kind of go through the map here of the 8th. So I know you guys are going to be watching this on the 10th, right? In theory. But I do the map a day behind, and we're trying out something new here, so bear with me. This is going to be for the 8th, and I can guarantee, like, most Western media, because I fancy myself as a bit of a journalist, and I do work in journalism a little bit, or have worked in journalism a little bit. 98 to I don't know, 95 to 98% of this information isn't talked about in Western media. Some days it's 100%. So I think you guys might get some interesting insight if we go through this a little bit together. And I map it in a horseshoe. That's the way I kind of like go about doing the geolocation part of it, placing coordinates. So that's what I want to do with you guys here. Is I want to kind of start over here, work our way back around, and call it a night. So let's start over here in Volyn Oblast. So one of the things that we see all across Ukraine, and this will become like more relevant as we get later into the map, UXO and demining operations. Every single day we are mapping demining operations, UXO disposal, whatever it might be, all kinds of ordnance, illegal arms seizures too as well. We map those, not just like shelling and stuff like that, but you can see it's not even just like shelling from um, the invasion in 2014 or the full-scale invasion in 2022. It's also World War II, World War One, ammunition that's left over that is kind of in Western Ukraine, far from any of the hostilities that we got in 2022 or 2014. So moving into Kyiv, I want to take a look at a couple things here and just highlight a couple things for people so that they like can regularly check them on the map. So one thing that's really important here, I always put it in Independence Square too, just because if you go there, I haven't been there myself, but if you do go there, you'll see lots of memorials for fallen soldiers. And so there's an in memoriam section that I kind of do whenever we get posts about fallen soldiers or people who have been killed in Russian strikes. So Junior Sergeant Denis Ivanilov was killed by an FPV strike in Bakhmut, unfortunately. And he was buried in Kyiv, and they held services, I believe, this week for him in memoriam. Now, if we take a look back a couple days ago, over here in Oblonsky Rayon, we had some missile strikes that really targeted this building here, more or less. I can't stack all of the markers on top of each other, or else it wouldn't be readable. So I need to kind of like surround the target of what got hit with markers. So bear with me on that. It's not 100% accurate on location. But we saw missile strikes across Kyiv that day, but specifically there, they're still working right now on repairing that. So if we zoom in here, we can see sort of the whole front facade of the building was destroyed, as well as a couple of the floors on the upper stories. Now, the major thing that I wanted to take a look at here, a huge humanitarian convoy leaving the UK. This picture is in the UK. It's not in Kyiv. So they're on their way to Ukraine with about 30 fire and rescue vehicles. Now, this is really important because like we talk like numbers of fire and rescue equipment that's been lost. It's enormous. But if we take a look at like Kherson Oblast, for example, we see like in a year they've lost more than that, like 40 ambulances or something like that in the last year, I think is what Perkuden said a couple months ago. So 30 is great, but more is needed, but 30 is great. So it's really important that that's happening, but we need to move on just a bit here. All right, so one thing that we do see in Chernihiv Oblast is the border heating up. And now this is one thing that we haven't really been mapping very much, and I've made an effort to really go out and try and find the sources. I have to kind of leave Telegram sometimes and go to Facebook to get the proper sourcing for this. So it does take a little bit of extra work, but it's worth it because I think it's really important because it could be something we see more of. So, like, yeah, 6 markers, not really anything crazy, but, like, if we go back on the Chernihiv border to the 5th or the 4th, it's kind of crazy, especially with drone strikes. So we're getting a lot of fiber optic Vandal drones. We had some geolocations here, so, like, specifically on the 4th, they hit the train station in Semenivka here in Chernihiv. So we saw the train station get whacked by an FPV drone. So you can see how it blew a hole through the roof, basically. And so other things that have gotten targeted here, like farm equipment, civilian cars as well in the middle here. I think it was right around here. It's right around there. We saw a drone strike on a civilian car. But basically, from the Sumy Chernihiv border all the way to the Belarusian border, we're getting strikes. So, like in Hremyach, all the way to Hronivka and Kliusi. So, I also really kind of like, I don't know, I really like the names. You get used to seeing a ton of names. I like the names of these villages. They're very different and interesting compared to like a lot of the other village names that you might get in like southern Ukraine or eastern Ukraine. I don't know, Kosta Bobriv, I like that one a lot because it has bober in it. I like beavers. So bobers aside, moving on, we have some UXO as well as let me get the right day. Here we go. We've got UXO and fire. I always map like civilian fires and stuff like that go on during the day. So if you're interested in sort of like what's going on in terms of like the impact on people's home heating situation, how home heating situation then leads to their houses burning down, and maybe even like casualties. So we can see like kind of like indirect effects of Russian attacks on the power grid, right? With these people on frontline oblasts being forced into some pretty tough situations in terms of finding opportunities or options to heat their homes, resorting to like electric heaters or open fires, and we've seen unfortunately some people pass away because of that. Again, UXO, we will see a lot of that. So that's like a Shahhead drone, warhead that you can see there. And was there another interesting one? No, a grenade. There wasn't another interesting one. I think it was from today. Okay. So, all right. Let's talk about on the ground here. So as the Ukrainians are pushing into Belgorod Oblast, or trying to here around Demidovka, and as the Russians are pushing in from the north side of Sumsky Rayon, we see these 3 Hromadas really being hit the most. Krasnopilska Hromada, Miropilska Hromada, and Unikivska Hromada. Mostly airstrikes going on along up here in Unikivska. And then we see like really this major focus on Krasnopilska. Focusing on these villages here. So like Osayevska, Naumivka, Uhrodi, Krasnopilya itself, Samatayevka as well. As well as like Velika Rybitsa and Mala Rybitsa in Miropilska Hromada. So like those villages are also getting hit as well. One thing to note, cluster munition use, which that is not normal for this area as far as like news reporting goes. It could be very normal, and just not reported, but for me to see this like and get like specifically cluster munition use in Krasnopilska Hromada, that was interesting for me today. A little alarming as well, especially because there's still civilians, especially civilians with limited mobility and health issues, so like comorbidities, in addition to like um, their their mobility issues. So, like, for example, this man was also ill in addition to also having mobility issues and needed to be wheelchaired out. That's something that we see all over Ukraine in the frontline villages and oblasts, but it's usually elderly people who are pretty ill, who might not have a family, and who really don't have the means or capability to get themselves out of this situation. So we have the White Angels coming to save them. All right. Excuse me while I yawn. It's late. So moving on from Sumy, I want to talk here briefly about Kharkiv and this like sort of like northern chunk of Kharkiv. It's called Zolochivska Hromada. So talking about Zolochivska Hromada, I think is really important because tons of airstrikes, absolutely clobbered with airstrikes, and they pick like these villages here like all have these sort of like tree foliage, these like nice thick dense foliage. I don't know, sort of like almost like fortifications around the villages here. And so those have been getting absolutely clobbered this last week. If we take a look, airstrikes, no airstrikes, but one airstrike. So like the last like 3 days have been pretty intense, and that I think that goes kind of like hand in hand with our assessment that Russia is beginning something to kind of like light up this part of the front here, right? Like Velika Pisarivska Hromada in southern Sumy Oblast, and this part of like Bohudukiv Rayon. Bohudukivsky Rayon. Yeah, I said that right. Okay. And before we talk about Kharkiv itself, not much went on in Kupiansk, but I do want to talk about what happened in Vovchansk. So one thing that we maintain with the basement and with Tochny and some stuff that we're working on with Tochny right now is just like this idea that the human safari, this idea of like FPV strikes on human beings, like it's not just limited to what's happening in Kherson. So the safari is also happening in Kharkiv Oblast. It's also happening in Sumy Oblast. It's also happening in Zaporizhia, in Dnipropetrovsk, in Donetsk, in Chernihiv. So there's really, it's really important to keep that in mind, as evidenced by a 64-year-old man who was killed by shelling. It was a 63-year-old man who was killed by an FPV strike. Now, he, like that 64-year-old man that we saw in Sumy Oblast, he was, like the White Angels were trying to evacuate one of his friends, and unfortunately, the Russians committed a war crime. And we also saw that was not the only thing that happened that day. 2 humanitarian aid workers were distributing aid, and their van was attacked as well in Byly-Kolodiaz. So both in Chuhuyev Rayon up here near Vovchansk in Vovchanska Hromada. So hot spot for human safari activity. Keep an eye on it. Now, just like a disclaimer really quick with this stuff, the Shaheds, right? I'm not marking them specifically where they fell, but in Osnovyansky Rayon here, and a little bit in Shevchenkivsky, a little bit in Kivsky, and a little bit in Industrialny Rayon. We saw these strikes going on here. So mainly that's centered around this geolocation center around footage taken from an apartment building of strikes hitting sort of in this area and these reports. So we saw, shops and cars were destroyed, fires were set, 3 people injured, which tracks because I believe we had 6 people total. 7 civilians were injured, 1 was killed. Okay, total in Kharkiv. Okay, and also in Sirkuni there was a shot head that was shot down, it seems like, and it fell. Okay, so moving on. Let's move on. There was some UXO clearing in Balaklia and Izium. That's because there was a incident. Yeah, on the 5th. There's an incident on the 5th where a car blew up, hit a landmine. So again, UXO, that's a big theme. So clearing that UXO there, really important. We also saw in Kramatorsk, there was a strike also in memoriam 3 years ago. There was also a strike on railway infrastructure, on a train, railway station, and that was a tragedy that people in the local community were commemorating today. But on the anniversary of that attack is when we have this massive Shahed strike on Kramatorsk as well. So, you know, the way Russia tries to sort of repeat history or use history as a weapon against people. So we see in Donetsk Oblast, this is the total casualty report, Kramatorsk, Pokrovsk, and Mirne. So 3, 1, and 1. So in Kramatorsk we had 3 injuries. In Pokrovsk we had 1 injury, and also 1 injury in Mirne. Mirne, small little frontline village here. So we had our 1 injury, and we had some airstrikes in Mirne. And also in Pokrovsk we had some civilian evacuation operations. So guys carrying shotguns in order to down the drones. Several times in this video, if you go to the Donetsk police and watch this sort of like, it's like a 5-minute long video, they have to hide from drones a couple times, and then they're able to sort of convince a couple people. He has to kind of like yell at one of the elderly ladies to get in the car at one point because she won't get in the car, but they actually end up getting everybody out safe eventually. But it's really dangerous in this southern part of Pokrovsk because, you know, only a few clicks away from the front line. Not a great place to be. So, and that's what the street looks like. The White Angels evacuated them. Okay. And just like Donetsk Oblast at large, we're also seeing people evacuating from frontline communities, heading out to Chernivtsi, Vinnytsia, Lviv, and Zakarpattia. So we're seeing like resettlement of internally displaced people pretty much every day. That's being reported on. So you can check here for, sometimes they release statistics on how many people have been evacuated. Today they didn't, but I know for the map for the 9th, there will be some significant statistics. Okay, moving into Zaporizhia Oblast. And well, southern Donetsk and kind of southern Zaporizhia. There's not much I want to talk about on the Zaporizhia front line. There's just like it's not like super interesting from like a shelling frontline perspective. I mean, from like a geolocation perspective, very interesting, but like from my perspective, there's not like a ton that goes on because there's not like a ton that's reported from like a civilian perspective, aside from just like what happens in each of these hotspots like Hulaypala, Orikhiv, Kamyanska. Okay, so talking about these little red markers here. So Russians using schools for Russification and colonization of occupied territory. So we see in Mariupol 9 educators in the Mariupol and Volnovakha up here. Rayons are suspected of collaboration and pro-Russian propaganda. So, something to pay attention to. Pardon the yawns, it's really late when I'm recording this. So, we see some more primary school teachers, one from Berdyansk, another from Sofiivka in Berdyansk Rayon in Zaporizhia. So we see people agreeing to participate in education of children, indoctrination of children into the Russian ideology. As well as some men from the DNR who were charged for treason and war crimes. We see they were, I think, guilty of war crime. Nope. Here in Dniprovsky district. I'm pretty sure they kidnapped. Yeah. They kidnapped a guy in Dniprovsky district. And tortured him. So that was one thing that was going on there. We also saw some cooperation from a person from Chernobyivka in 2022 that they took care of. And some propaganda and a police officer, or quote-unquote police officer, occupation police officer. Also, in memoriam, and this happened a while ago, but police officer, when we're talking about like UXO being really important, police officer unfortunately passed away on the 4th of November when unexpectedly explosive went off, and he unfortunately died from his injuries. 41-year-old Alexander Vitra. So, speaking of that, let's take a look over here. I know the picture doesn't illustrate it because it's just from the Kherson Oblast police. I think there wasn't actually a picture of the event itself, but a police car hit a AP mine. So we see like remote mining with any kind of explosive device like IEDs, AP mines, AT mines, hitting or hidden all along these highways, the Berezovsky Highway specifically, and then also the Kherson to Mykolaiv Highway. I have a source that lived in Stanislav down there that told me like this is not a fun place to drive. Also, this road here, not a good time to... Not a good time, from what I've heard. Okay, so that aside, let's talk more about like what's going on here within Kherson. I think today there were, or for the 8th, there were 4 casualties, mostly elderly men, from what I understand. And just because there's an airstrike marker there doesn't mean there was actually an airstrike there. Prokudin just reports airstrikes and shelling kind of is the same. So you'll notice like it's airstrikes and shelling. So and drone attacks as well. So that's what we see going on in Kherson. Just keep in mind we always get some shelling going on down here in this part of Mykolaiv Oblast. Every now and again we've been seeing like some strikes up into like Limani and Halintsove. But oftentimes, as you can see, like Kutsarub and Ochakhiv are getting smacked, usually once a night. Okay, let's talk about this here. So this one's kind of a this one I threw in for, I don't know, I threw it into for whatever. So a group of 6 people from Odessa and Kyiv Oblast threw a grenade randomly into the yard of a person in Kobleva in Mykolaiv Oblast. Now, this isn't the first time this has happened in Mykolaiv Oblast. There was a story from like, maybe it was in December I can't remember honestly, but the guy was running away from the cops and threw a grenade out the window to kind of like get like the cops off his tail, and it did not work. He got caught for that and for throwing a grenade at the cops. So like that's that's one thing that happens sometimes. Grenades happen in Ukraine, man, especially in Mykolaiv Oblast, it seems. So grenades aside, one really good thing that happened today, there was a major power outage in Odessa. About 43,000 people got their power back. And unfortunately, I won't show the picture, but there was, and this is something we track every now and again, but in the river here, there was a drowning, unfortunately, in Verkhovnia in Ivano-Frankivsk Oblast, which is unfortunate, but that does happen. Yeah, that's some UXO in Cherkasy. It's kind of just in the middle. I don't want to skip it, but it's not necessarily all that important. We did miss Dnipro. Oh, there was a drone attack. There's more about this on the map for the 9th. But there was a drone attack as well in Dnipro, and we saw 10 people. I think that increased to 14, with victims aging from 18 to 87. So that's one thing that we saw coming out of Dnipro Oblast, Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, sorry. And then just kind of a point of good news, I think. Kind of an interesting thing, an important thing. Some underground schools. These have gotten criticism in the past. It's like, is this a good investment? Because like, you're not always going to need the underground school. Obviously, like an underground school is not necessarily ideal for like normal education conditions. So like people in other oblasts, I know in Kherson, were like really up in arms about like the construction of underground schools. But honestly, like if you think about Zaporizhia versus Kherson, like Kherson has about like 35 to 40,000 people left in it, whereas Zaporizhia has many more than that. And they have like a fully functional educational system going on in Zaporizhia and everything. So like it's very different conditions, except also like what Zaporizhia gets hit with is also very different. Like we saw in the fall, this area and this area back here get smacked with airstrikes pretty significantly. And they were devastating. Like we saw like pretty high casualty figures, pretty high casualty tolls, which was horrific. Like it was some of the more horrific things that we've seen out of this year so far, or out of 2024. It was some of the worst stuff that we saw in terms of videos and photos and stuff. So protecting the children, I think it's good. Schools being underground does afford them that protection, but also I think it's important to remember that this also gives kids an opportunity to learn in person, because many Ukrainian children have not been learning in person. Some have never learned in person in their entire life, because basically the war started right as the world was kind of like just opening up, post-COVID sort of. So in Ukraine, they didn't necessarily get back from distance learning. They were still distance learning when things went down. So there are some children who actually have never been in a classroom. So this will actually afford them that opportunity. So I think that's really good, actually. It'll actually help those kids kind of maybe make up for some of the lost time in terms of like missed learning goals and stuff like that. And I think that'll be better for Ukraine's youth overall. So that's a good thing. And then sometimes I map like really good things, like Kitty got saved. I'm not a cat person, but even I need some like good news every now and again. So like every now and again, dogs and cats get saved. We like to map it because it's good and because the police are saving animals all the time in Ukraine. So that's all, guys. That's all I got. I hope that wasn't too much. I think it was, I don't know, it was like 20 minutes or 30 minutes. I don't know. But yeah, if you guys want to check out what I do, you can follow me on X at Kelly7622. That's my account, where you can also find all my links to my Substack. You can also follow me on Instagram at Kelly2276. Same thing, but different numbers switched around. And I cover the war there as well in my stories. And you can find me writing for Tochny and the Bober's Lodge on my Substack, where I do Kherson Weekly and track the human safari a little more closely. So stay tuned. Maybe we'll do some more of these videos in the future where we give sort of like a daily news update and kind of look over some of the minutia, but highlight some of the important things that you guys might miss. So stay tuned. Keep checking the map and check out my Twitter. And if you feel like we deserve it, maybe throw Andrew a tip so that we can buy satellite imagery and find more vehicles. All right. That's all, guys. Thanks.